All right, so now we want to have a single page, basically a details page for each user. Now with the GitHub API, you can make a request to this endpoint where it's /users/ and then whatever the login. I'm using my own here, and it will give you a whole bunch of stuff: the login, the avatar URL, some of the same stuff that we've dealt with the other endpoint, but it also gives you like the full name, company, blog, which is basically your website, location, email if you have one, a public email, if you're hireable, a bio, your repos, number of repositories, number of gists, your followers, following, date, all that stuff. So you can make a pretty extensive profile. We're not going to use everything here, but we're going to use quite a bit. Now, I think that what I'd like to do is, before I actually create the user component, is create the function to make the request. And as you know, we're doing all that right now in our app.js. So let's put this right below the search GitHub users. Okay, so this is going to get a single GitHub user. So let's create a function here, or better yet, a method. This is within our class. And let's call this get user. And it's going to be asynchronous. We're going to use a sync await, and it's going to take in this get user. It needs to know which user to get, so it's going to take in the login, or I should say the login, username, same thing. So I'm just going to call it username. All right, and then we'll have our arrow, and just like we did with our other requests, we're going to set state to true. Actually, you know what I'll do is just copy all this. So we're going to set the loading state to true, and then the endpoint we want to hit is not search. It's going to just be /users/ and then the username. So we're going to say users/ and then put in here the username that's passed in, and then we just want to put a question mark because client ID is now the first parameter. And we want to include our client ID and all that stuff. Now, when it comes to the state, we're no longer dealing with users. What I'm going to do is have a piece of state called user, which is going to be it's going to be an object. So we can make it an empty object. Sometimes I'll make this stuff null, and we'll probably do that in future projects. But I think right now I'm just going to make this an empty object. All right, and then once we get the user, we're going to add to user res.data, which will give us that single user. Not .items, that's only for the search result. And loading, we want, of course, to set to false. So that's what we want to call. So now let's save this, and let's create a new component in users. So we'll create a new file, and we'll call this user.js. Okay. And this is actually going to be a class-based component, so we'll do RCE, and it's not going to have any state, but it's going to use a lifecycle method. We need to use component did mount to fire off that get user function that we created in app.js. All right, but for now, I just want to render this with a route, so I'm just going to put in just the word user and save, and then let's go to app.js, and we need to bring this in, so we'll just copy down users and take off the S here and here. So we have our user component brought in. Now we need to create a route. Now when it comes to creating the route, we can't just do component equals user like we did with about, because we have stuff we need to pass in. We need to pass in the get user prop, which is the function we created. Also, we need to pass in the user state, okay, whatever the current user is. So we're going to do kind of the same thing we did here with this render props. So let's create a route. And like I said earlier, we'll be refactoring this later on once we have app level state. But and it'll be able to show you, how helpful it is to have the context API, to have Redux and stuff like that. So let's say route exact path equals, and it's going to be /user, and then we're going to do :login because we need to know which user it is. So the username or the login is going to be passed in here as part of the URL. All right, and then we'll have a render and we're going to set that to props with an arrow function. And inside here, we want to render the user component. Now, there's some stuff we need to pass in. One is the props, any extra props we have. So we want to use the spread operator. So basically, you know, whatever props are passed in, we want to add those. And then we also want to add the get user, because remember, we're calling this prop from the component, and we're going to set that to this.getUser, which is the method we created in the beginning. And then in addition to that, we want to send in the user state, and we can just say user because we didn't destructure it. So let's add in here user and pull that out from the state. Otherwise, we would have to do this.state.user. Okay, so it's whatever is in this value right here, which gets filled when we call get user. Okay, when we call this, that's going to get filled up with our response. All right, so I think that's all. Oh, let's pass in loading as well. So loading is going to equal loading, because we'll just show a spinner if the user isn't fetched yet. Okay, so back in user.js, actually let's create a link so that we can actually go to the user page. So that's going to be in the user item. Right now, we just have an href going to the actual profile in the user item, and that's not what we want. We want a link, so let's import link from React Router DOM, and then we're going to change this a tag to a link and change this to 2. Now this is going to be dynamic, so what I'm going to do is add some backticks in here, and we want it to go to /user/ and then whatever the login. So we're going to use this syntax and pass in login, which we pulled out from the user. All right, and yeah, I think that should do it. So let's save this. Let's go back to, that's our user component. Let's go back to the home page here and search. And if I click on more, it brings us to user/ and then in this case Brad Traversy, whatever the whatever the username is. So now what we have to do is pull this username or this login from the URL and then call that get user. Okay, that get user method. So inside user.js, let's go ahead and let's add in component did mount, so that this fires off right away when this component's loaded. And we're going to say this.props.getUser. And the way that we can pull it from the URL is from within the props. There's match.params, and then whatever param we want, in this case is login. And where I got that from is right here. Okay, so this is a param of login, and that's what I want to grab. And I want to pass it in to get user, because if we look at get user, which is right here, it takes in login, or I called it username, but it's login is the same thing. And then it's going to go ahead and make the request, get that user's information. It's going to fill the user state with the response, and then we're passing the user state back in to the user component right here. And then we should have access to all the user's data. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now we're also passing in loading, so we can load a spinner at that point where it's actually fetching the data. So let's do some of that. Trying to think of how I want to do that. Let's actually pull out all the data we want from this.props.user, because remember, user is getting passed in as a prop. So within the render, before the return, I'm going to say const, and let's pull this stuff from this.props.user. So we're going to take the name, avatar, URL, location, bio, we'll get the blog, the website, login, which is the username, HTML URL, which is the actual GitHub profile link, the followers following public repos, public gists, and hireable. Okay, and all this stuff I'm getting, you can see right here. So it's just all this stuff is available to us because this is the endpoint that we hit. So we're pulling all that stuff from this.props.user. Now let's also pull, let's say const, let's pull loading, and actually, yeah, just loading for now from this.props. Okay. So we should now have access. What is this all about here? Oh. So we should have access to the data. Let's just try it. So we'll say, let's do name, because we pulled that out right here from this.props user, which is being passed in. So if we save this and we go back to, there we go, Brad Fitzpatrick. Okay, if I go back and I search for Brad again, I go to mine, we get Brad Traversy. So we have access to that data. Over here, it's just telling us a bunch of stuff that we brought in, but we haven't used yet. So don't worry about that. All right, so I think in the next video, what I want to do is start to create the page, start to create the UI now that we have the data being brought in. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.